The story of the Trojan Horse does not begin with a wooden structure being dragged into a city. It begins centuries earlier, in a world that was both deeply connected and deeply divided. We are in the late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE, a time when kingdoms stretched across the Mediterranean and Aegean seas, bound together by trade, diplomacy, and often war. A select band of the most disciplined and battle-hardened Greek warriors crouched motionless inside the stifling, shadow-filled belly of a colossal wooden horse, their muscles tense and their hands gripping sword hilts slick with anticipation, their breaths measured so as not to betray even the faintest sound. Outside, the night hung heavy over Troy, the once proud city, now the focal point of a decade-long war that had drained the lifeblood of two great civilizations. The sky was beginning to pale at the edges as dawn crept closer, and with it came the moment they had all been waiting for, the chance to emerge from their cunning disguise, to undo the massive gates from within, and to let the flood of Greek soldiers come roaring into the heart of the city like a tidal wave of vengeance. These men had been chosen for this desperate, audacious final gambit not merely because they were skilled with spear and blade, but because they possessed the discipline to wait, cramped in darkness, while their comrades outside enacted the elaborate ruse that had lulled the Trojans into a false sense of security. The air inside the wooden chamber was thick with the scent of sweat, resin, and oiled leather. Every creak of the timber echoed like a thunderclap in their ears. Every muffled cheer from the streets beyond reminded them how close their prey was to celebrating a victory that would never truly be theirs. At last, a faint signal reached them. A soft, deliberate knock that told them the time had come. Like predators slipping from the tall grass, they eased open a concealed trap door in the underside of the horse's massive belly and slid into the cool air of the early morning. Their feet made almost no sound on the ancient paving stones as they moved, swift and deliberate, through the city's narrow alleys. A startled guard had just enough time to widen his eyes before a blade kissed his throat, sending him crumpling without a sound. Another turned to shout an alarm, but an arrow from the shadows found his heart. With ruthless precision, the infiltration force ensured no one would raise the cry that could foil their mission. Within moments, the great wooden gates that had stood closed to the Greeks for 10 relentless years swung outward with a slow, ominous groan. Beyond them, in the darkness, an army waited like a coiled serpent ready to strike. Troy, unaware of the doom creeping toward it, was about to be drowned in fire and slaughter. But how much of this vision, this climactic end to a legendary siege, was truth? And how much the polished embellishment of poets and storytellers? Surprisingly, the consensus among many modern historians and archaeologists is that the Trojan War, stripped of divine meddling and superhuman feats, was likely rooted in genuine events. No immortal warriors, no shimmering goddesses descending from Olympus, only men, politics, pride, and blood. Yet, through the mists of time, those bare facts were clothed in the luminous finery of myth. To understand how such a war began, we must step back into an age 3,000 years past, where the kingdoms of Greece and the great city of Troy stood on opposite shores of the wine-dark Aegean, and where a fateful choice in a temple would ignite one of the most enduring tales in human memory. In the hushed interior of Aphrodite's sacred sanctuary, Paris, a young Trojan prince, knelt before a gleaming statue of the goddess of love and beauty. The air rich with the scent of burning incense, the flickering torchlight glinting off white marble and casting long, undulating shadows across the polished floor. In his hands he held an apple forged of pure gold, its surface catching and reflecting the firelight like a captured sun. This was no mere ornament, but an offering of immense symbolic weight, a pledge given to the goddess in the hope she would favor him in a matter that had consumed his heart and mind. Paris had fallen hopelessly, irreversibly, in love with Helen, the wife of another, a woman whose beauty was said to rival that of the Olympian goddesses themselves, a beauty so potent that, as whispers had it, kingdoms might bleed for it. Her husband, King Menelaus of Sparta, was a man not only of high birth but of proven strength in war, and Paris knew that to challenge him openly would be to court his own death. Yet passion has a way of drowning out caution, and Paris's thoughts were no longer his own. As he whispered his final prayer into the stillness, the flames of the torches danced higher, as if the goddess herself were acknowledging his devotion. Rising, Paris placed the apple gently into Aphrodite's lap, the cold marble beneath his fingers, a silent witness to his vow. He turned and walked away, each step taking him closer to the palace where Helen lived, in opulent seclusion. She had been the envy of Greece long before she became Menelaus's queen, courted by every eligible man of note, each suitor hoping to claim her as his own. It was said that to avoid conflict, her father had bound those suitors with an oath to defend her marriage against any who might violate it, a promise that would later summon the armies of Greece to her cause. Menelaus, though proud and strong, was not blind to the constant undercurrent of desire his wife inspired. She was the jewel of his court, and he guarded her as he would his most prized possession. But Paris, driven by a yearning that felt stronger than reason itself, resolved to risk all. He slipped through the palace under the watchful eyes of the gods, painted across the vaulted ceilings, and the living eyes of guards posted at every turn. The corridors seemed endless, each one presenting the possibility of discovery and death. But he moved with the silent determination of a man who believed the fates themselves were guiding him. At last, he reached the threshold of her chambers. He stepped inside, bracing for rejection, for alarm, for the blow that would shatter his heart. Instead, Helen turned, surprise flashing in her eyes before a slow, knowing smile curved her lips. Whether it was the pull of destiny, the will of Aphrodite, or simply the convergence of two restless souls, they understood each other without words. In that stolen moment, their course was set. Together they fled under cover of darkness, making for the Trojan ships anchored in the Spartan harbor. At Paris's command, the oars bit into the dark waters, carrying them toward Troy and sealing the doom of thousands yet to die. When Menelaus awoke to the absence of his queen, the truth struck him with the force of a spear to the chest. His rage was a living thing, erupting as he smashed furniture and roared orders to his attendants. He summoned the kings of Greece, invoking the binding oath they had all sworn. The message was clear. Troy would pay, and pay dearly. At the head of the assembled host stood Agamemnon, brother to Menelaus, a man whose authority was unquestioned. Ships were prepared, laden with warriors, siege engines, and the supplies for a long campaign. But as the fleet lay ready, the sea remained stubbornly still, the sails slack in the motionless air. Consulting the oracle, Agamemnon learned the gods demanded a sacrifice to release the winds, not just any life, but that of his own daughter, Iphigenia. Torn between his duty as a commander and his love as a father, Agamemnon chose the path that would brand his soul forever. Deceiving his wife, Clytemnestra, he sent word that Iphigenia was to wed Achilles, the greatest warrior in Greece. When mother and daughter arrived in their finest garments, expecting a wedding, they found instead an altar, a knife, and grim-faced soldiers. Clytemnestra fought like a lioness to reach her child, but was restrained as Agamemnon, steeling himself against her screams, performed the sacrifice. The winds rose as Iphigenia's lifeblood touched the earth, and the fleet sailed for Troy. They landed on the beaches beneath Troy's towering walls, but the Trojans, secure within, refused open battle. Priam, the city's aged king, could not surrender his son, though he saw the war it would bring. For 10 years, the Greeks battered the walls, fought bloody skirmishes on the plains, and buried their dead. But Troy stood. Achilles was the spearhead of the Greek might, his presence on the field turning the tide time and again, until Agamemnon's arrogance drove him away. Robbed of a woman he cherished, Achilles refused to fight, and without him the Greeks faltered. Patroclus, his dearest friend, took up Achilles' armor to rally the men, and in the chaos was met by Hector, Troy's champion. Mistaking him for Achilles, Hector struck him down, only to realize too late whose life he had taken. The news drove Achilles to a frenzy of grief and rage. He returned to the field, challenged Hector before the gates, and slew him in a duel that stilled the clash of armies to watch. Then, in a display that horrified even his own men, he dragged Hector's body behind his chariot, circling the city until the broken King Priam came in person to beg for his son's remains. Moved at last, Achilles relented, but his fate was already sealed. Paris, urged into battle by his father after Hector's death, loosed an arrow that struck Achilles in the only place he could be wounded, his heel, untouched by the waters of the Styx when his mother had sought to make him immortal. The hero fell, and the Trojans, seizing their chance, swarmed him before his comrades could reach him. Even in death, Achilles' name would outshine all others, his armor passing to Odysseus, who, though no match in raw strength, possessed a mind sharpened by cunning. It was Odysseus who conceived the final stratagem, to build from the timbers of their own ships a massive wooden horse, hollow within, capable of hiding a picked force of warriors. Leaving this apparent tribute at Troy's gates, the Greeks feigned retreat, their fleet hidden just beyond sight. Believing the war won, the Trojans brought the horse into the city as a trophy, feasting and drinking late into the night. In the deep hours, when the fires had burned low and the guards slept at their posts, the Greeks emerged from the horse, opened the gates, and signaled their waiting comrades. The city erupted in flames and screams. Men were cut down in their beds, women dragged from their homes, and by dawn Troy was nothing but smoking ruin. Helen was seized and returned to Menelaus, her fate sealed in silence as the victors sailed for home, many to meet their own deaths before ever seeing Greece again. Centuries later, in the hills of Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey, excavations would reveal the remains of multiple cities built one atop another, some showing signs of war, others of earthquake. Scholars debated which layer, the Grand Sixth or the war-scarred Seventh, matched the Troy of Homer's song. Some argued the horse was never a literal beast of wood, but a metaphor perhaps for an earthquake sent by Poseidon, god of horses and of the trembling earth, to breach the city walls. Others suggested it referred to siege engines, clad in horsehide, to resist fire. In 2021, wooden planks of ancient date were unearthed there, stirring speculation, though most saw in them the remnants of some forgotten war machine rather than proof of a colossal sculpture. As for Helen herself, no evidence proves she lived, yet history has known wars begun over far smaller slights. Whether the spark was the theft of a queen, the hunger for land, or the need to dominate a rival trade power, the fire it lit burned for a decade and left its mark on history. And so the tale endures not because every detail is true, but because it speaks to the timeless human truths of desire, pride, deception, and the cost of war.